Well, here we are then. Double feature. Episode 2, so to speak. This time around, we're talking about Lifeforce from 1985, as well as Flashdance from 1983. Now, these are not very similar movies, but as with last time, my explanation is simple as to why I chose to watch these two movies. On one hand, I decided to go through some of the more classic, that depends on the definition of classic, but nonetheless classic in a certain way, musical movies. And amongst these movies is obviously Flashdance, even though it's not a classical musical as such, but rather a music video-esque contraption that was created in the 80s. I recall having read a critique of Flashdance in which the critic in question called it or compared it to watching 1.5 hours of MTV, calling it empty, shallow, and just, well, very visually appealing, but not having anything to offer beyond that. And I have to disagree. It's not a masterpiece. It is not a movie that is iconic because of some sort of deep writing exercise that was performed here by the writers. No. The script is okay. In all honesty, it works perfectly fine. Our main protagonist is this young girl who is trying to, or at least who has aspirations to become a professional dancer, but she isn't quite sure whether or not she can do that and whether or not she's going to even get accepted into an academy to, do what she wants to do professionally. If I recall correctly, her sister, if that really was her sister, either her sister or her friend, I'm not quite sure if it was ever mentioned whether or not these two are related. Anyhow, another character in the movie tries to become a professional ice skater, and her performance in front of some judges ends badly as she falls on her ass at least 3 times, either 3 or 2 times. Point being, she doesn't get the kind of result that she would have wanted to get after 2 years of practice. And it's exactly this kind of setback that the other character experiences that our main character considers as a warning, so to speak, because that is exactly what she fears might happen to her if she tries to apply for a dance academy and has her, application, so to speak, her dance fail. But I'll watch the movie yourself. I believe that Flashdance has a lot of things to offer. Specifically, great, absolutely breathtaking dance performances, if you know anything about dancing. And, or let me rephrase that, you don't need to know shit about dancing. Just try to perform one of these routines shown in the movie, and I'll guarantee you that unless you are a professional dancer, you will struggle. This shit is some hardcore professional dancing. It goes so far that, due to the fact that I've read up on some trivia, there's a scene in the movie in which our main character performs a breakdance, which is not something that the actress who portrayed the main character could actually do. Literally, she didn't do that. They had to get a stunt double for that because that's a different type of dance altogether. But nonetheless, it is still, all of it is very impressive to watch because the human body, commanding the human body to such a degree as they do in the movie, is just, it is very demanding. And unless you've trained rigorously, and even then it's not a guarantee, you won't be able to pull off such a feat. The music is absolutely banging. This movie contains some of the most iconic 80s songs ever, which is, in my opinion, kind of baffling, considering that the movie was made in 1983, and quite often in the early years of a decade, it happens that the decade isn't quite the decade yet. It is more or less a dying version of the previous decade. And if you go through the top 100 songs of the years 1980 to 1983, quite often it feels more like you're going through a best of 1970s hits, or at least songs that sound very similar to songs from the 1970s. Not so with this soundtrack, which is just filled to the brim with 80s goodness. The entire style of this movie is just 80s galore, which once again, there were quite a few movies from the early 80s that I've seen which reminded me more of movies from the 70s. But this movie got it down, and let me be honest, it is worth a watch. Unless you totally do not like at all, dancing, 80s music videos, and 80s cinematography, as well as just the entire 80s neon type style. If you don't like any of that, and if you don't like the idea of an aspirational movie about a young person trying to take their passion and make it happen, so to speak, then if you dislike any of the things that I just previously mentioned, then stay the fuck away from Flashlight. What the fuck? No, Flashdance. From Flashdance. But if you like any of these things, watch it. It's really enjoyable. I give Flashdance a 7 out of 10. It really kind of rocks. I will definitely rewatch it one of these days. And yes, sure, there's also nudity in there. Might have something to do with my gravitation towards it, just a teeny tiny bit. It's a teeny bit, not a lot. Like I'm legit not watching movies to jerk off to them. If if I want a movie to jerk off to, I watch a porno. I don't watch Flashdance, and I also don't watch Lifeforce if I want to have a movie to jerk off to, because yet again we are also graced with some lovely tits in that. Whether or not that was on purpose and to draw in more viewers is debatable, but Toby Hooper with Lifeforce from 1985 created a bit of a pulp horror space masterpiece, in my opinion. It is a movie that has a lot to offer and should have been a blockbuster. It is mind-boggling to think that this movie bombed at the box office back in 1985. It has interesting special effects, granted not all of them have aged as gracefully as they could have, but most of them still stand the test of time. Amazing performances, for example, from Aubrey Morris, whom you might know from Clockwork Orange, or if you are a connoisseur of 60s television, from The Prisoner. But most importantly, we got Patrick Stewart in there, and Patrick Stewart is giving his all. Never mind the fact that it's Patrick Stewart and Aubrey Morris. All the other actors give great performances, and nobody is slacking off here. And seeing London be reduced to rubble is quite amazing to look at. Listen, I'm not making a political statement out of that because of this, but London normally is not the main attack point for some sort of alien invasion, unless we're talking Doctor Who. But this would be a very grim and very brutal episode of Doctor Who, if it ever was to be in. Although it has very certain similarities to what a normal episode of Doctor Who would have. You know, it is about space vampires. Space vampires try to suck the life out of Earth or London. Initially, their plan is obviously kind of to use the Earth as a source for their life force, to replenish their life force, because these vampires need to regenerate constantly like normal vampires do. But the difference is that these vampires can be found in Halley's Comet in a giant synapse-shaped spaceship, which sounds really weird, but once again, that's the pulp factor for you. The spaceship design is great, and it comes close to something like H.R. Geiger would make. And yeah, it's not quite alien, but it is very close to it, just from a design standpoint. The aliens themselves, the space vampires, in their true form, look kind of like what you would expect a transformed vampire to look like. But to the manipulatable human eye, they look like very sexy people. That's the best way I can describe it. Listen, the girl, as not necessarily big-titted, but she gets some tits on her, and she's nude for most of the movie. And she is a very pretty lady, and the dudes are rather hunkalicious, so to speak. In both categories, you'll get what would be considered very traditionally attractive people, and that's the point. These vampires draw in their victims with their sex appeal initially, and suck out all the energy. Insert dirty joke here, and yeah, I mean that's kind of it. That's kind of the point of the whole movie, and then you have these transformed humans who are like half zombies, half almost dust mummies, one could call them. And there are quite a few interesting scenes in which you have these dust zombies just walking around chasing people, getting blown to bits. One of them runs into a wall. No, not a wall, but into a cell door, and he kind of just busts into dust particles. It's amazing to look at. Honestly, all these special effects, the practical ones, are really damn great, except for the occasional weird blue screen 80s thing. I don't know how to describe it exactly, but you know when you see it. But once again, if push comes to shove, just like Flashdance, this movie, yet again, it is about an 7 out of 10. It is way above average. There's so much love in there. And great performances, some of the great special effects. The soundtrack is amazing. Pardon me, got a bit of a hiccup here. And I can't really complain about this movie. Sure, it is a bit cheesy, but that's mostly like in hindsight as an 80s movie. And I can 100% live with that. I can 100%, groove to that kind of movie. You might not necessarily like it if you want your special effects to look up to date, because not all of them look as great as they should or could. And in my opinion, Lifeforce could use a hardcore remake. I'm talking like we keep all the violence, but we update these special effects. That would make it almost, almost perfect in my opinion. Quick anecdote before I end this review. Back in, I want to say 2006 maybe, I first saw this movie when it was on television. My brother was watching it because he is a horror movie nut. Hi, Eric, if you're watching. And I could have sworn the movie looked a bit more surreal than it actually did. That must have just been my imagination. Like, I could have sworn the sarcophagi in which they find the vampires initially in Halley's Comet, like that they looked a lot more like crystals and that the aliens themselves looked a lot more alien. But apparently not. They look a lot more like people than I expected. But that doesn't necessarily mean that their performances aren't really fucking aliens. Specifically, the female vampire is creepy, like really fucking creepy. But yeah, no, since then, fucking, what's it been? Yeah, 18 years? Does that make sense? Yeah, 18 years. It's been almost 18 years since then. And in that time, I guess I just kind of grew up, and it's no longer as scary as it once was to my 10-year-old mind back then. Happens, but the idea of the movie is still there, and honestly, there's still aspects that I respect deeply within this little movie made by Toby Hooper, whom you might know actually a lot more from his far more famous movie, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Which obviously, if you like any sort of horror movies at all, just watch Texas Chainsaw Massacre. If you're not necessarily sure about Lifeforce, I'm not going to be too mad at you because obviously the movie has some flaws. Not all the special effects hold up perfectly. There's a bit too much fan service in there. Think of it as, it's very comparable to the beginning of Elfenlied, but that's a different story. Other than that, it's 7 out of 10. I would recommend it, but I can understand if you don't want a sci-fi horror pseudo-nudity movie to watch with other people. But hey, Halloween's coming up, and maybe you'll decide to watch Lifeforce. I do recommend watch the international cut, though, because, nobody likes an edited horror movie. Anyway. The next one is not yet decided. I've not yet decided which 2 movies I'm going to review next. But up until then, See ya.